The rumble came first. Low. Deep. The kind of sound you feel in your chest before your ears understand what it means. Then the mist parted, and there it was. A Tiger tank. 60 tons of steel. An 88 mm gun. Invincible. The men of the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders had nothing that could stop it. No anti-tank gun. No air support. Just a stretch of muddy road, a handful of buried mines, and a decision that would take every ounce of courage they had left. What happened next would become legend. Imagine a sound. Not the roar of engines or the crack of rifles, but a low, grinding rumble. The kind you feel in your chest before you hear it with your ears. On a rain-soaked morning in May 1944, that sound rolled out of the mist toward a handful of exhausted men huddled behind a Belgian farmhouse wall. They knew what it was before they saw it. A Tiger. The most feared tank on the battlefield. 60 tons of steel, an 88 mm gun that could punch through a building, and armor that seemed to shrug off everything the Allies could throw at it. To the men waiting in its path, it might as well have been a dragon from the old stories. But what happened next would prove a simple truth that no amount of armor could defy. Sometimes the smallest thing, a single mine buried in the mud, a single man with the courage to stand his ground, can bring down a giant. The date was May 13, 1944. The place was a quiet crossroads near the Belgian village of Ophoven, close to the Dutch border. The men waiting there belonged to the 7th Battalion, the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders. They were part of the famous 51st Highland Division, veterans who had fought across North Africa and up through Italy. But that morning, they were just tired. They had been in the line for 9 days, sleeping in shifts, eating cold rations, watching the mist creep across the fields. Their job was to hold that crossroads. If it fell, the German army could drive a wedge between the British and American forces, throwing the entire front into chaos. They had rifles, a few anti-tank guns, and a scattering of mines laid by the Royal Engineers the week before. And they had each other. Bearing down on them was a company of Tiger tanks from the German 506th Heavy Tank Battalion, veterans of the Eastern Front who had been pulled back to refit. They were fresh, well-armed, and confident. At the head of the column was a single Tiger, its commander a seasoned officer who had already survived 3 years of the most brutal fighting the war had to offer. He didn't know about the mine. He didn't know about the men waiting in the cold. He only knew he had a road to take. By the spring of 1944, the war in Europe had reached a strange and fragile pause. In England, 1 million men were training for the invasion of Normandy. In Italy, the Allies were grinding forward through mud and mountains. But in Belgium, along the River Maas, the front had gone quiet. Too quiet. The 51st Highland Division had been sent there to rest after the brutal fighting in Italy. But rest was a luxury they never got. Intelligence reports warned that the Germans were massing for a counterattack, a spoiling strike meant to disrupt the build-up for D-Day. So instead of hot food and clean beds, the Highlanders found themselves digging slit trenches in the cold spring rain. The Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders were a territorial battalion, which meant most of them had joined as volunteers from the towns and villages of western Scotland. They were coal miners, factory workers, farmers, and fishermen. They had grown up together, enlisted together, and by 1944, they had already survived 3 years of war together. Commanding them was Lieutenant Colonel Derek Lang. He was not a fire-breathing hero out of a propaganda film. He was a quiet, methodical man who had learned his trade in the deserts of North Africa. He knew his men were exhausted. He knew his anti-tank guns were inadequate against German heavy armor. And he knew, with a certainty that sat like a stone in his stomach, that the attack was coming. His only hope was a small minefield laid by the Royal Engineers a few days earlier. There weren't enough mines to cover the whole road, just a 90-yard stretch where the pavement curved between 2 farmhouses. But it was something. In the darkness before dawn, Lang walked the line himself, speaking quietly to the men who would be the first to meet the German advance. "Hold here," he told them. "Just hold." Across the river, the men of the 506th Heavy Tank Battalion were making their own preparations. They had been pulled from the Eastern Front after the brutal winter battles around Kiev. Many of them carried scars, physical and otherwise, from their time in Russia. But they were proud of their Tigers. In their eyes, they were the best tank crews in the world, mounted in the finest machines the Reich had ever built. Their commander, a Hauptmann whose name would be lost to history, laid out the plan. One company would smash through the British roadblock. The Tigers would lead, their armor shrugging off anything the British could fire at them. Behind them, Panzer Grenadiers would mop up the surviving infantry. The crossroads would be theirs by noon. The lead Tiger was commanded by a man who had fought at Kharkov and Kursk. He had seen his share of desperate battles, but this felt different. The mist, the quiet, the sense of something waiting in the fog. He dismissed the feeling. It was just another roadblock. Just another village. Just another day. He gave the order to advance. The first light came at 0530 hours, but it brought no warmth. A thick, wet fog clung to the low ground, muffling sound, turning the world into a grey blur. For the men of the Argylls, the fog was a kind of comfort. If they couldn't see the Germans, maybe the Germans couldn't see them. But at 0600 hours, Private James McIntyre heard something. A low, distant rumble, like thunder on the horizon. He pressed his ear to the damp ground and felt it through the earth. Tracks. Many tracks. He ran to find his sergeant. "They're coming," he said. By 0700 hours, the sound had grown into a steady grinding roar. The fog began to lift, revealing the flat, open fields that bordered the road. Lieutenant Alastair Grant, commanding one of the two 6-pounder anti-tank guns dug in near the crossroads, watched the eastern horizon through his sights. His hands were cold. His stomach was empty. His mind was clear. At 0725 hours, the first shape emerged. It came out of the mist like a creature from a nightmare, a massive, boxy silhouette, its long gun jutting forward like a lance. A tiger. And behind it, another. Grant felt his throat tighten. He had heard stories about tigers, but seeing one in the flesh was different. It looked unstoppable. And in that moment, he wasn't sure it wasn't. The tiger moved slowly, deliberately. Its commander knew the danger of a hasty advance. The tank stopped every 50 yards, its crew scanning the fields and farmhouses for any sign of an ambush. Behind it, the second tiger stayed close, ready to provide cover. The German infantry followed in half tracks, their faces tense but confident. At 0800 hours, the lead tiger was 400 yards from the British roadblock. Grant watched through his sights as the steel monster grew larger. He knew his 6-pounder could penetrate the tiger's side armor at close range, but the front was a different story. He needed a flank shot. But the tiger was showing him nothing but its front. He gave the order to hold fire. Wait. Let it come closer. Let it make a mistake. At 0815 hours, the tiger halted. For a long, agonizing moment, nothing moved. Then, with a sudden thunderous roar, the 88mm gun fired. The shell struck a farmhouse where a section of Highlanders was dug in. The stone wall exploded inward. Men screamed. The tiger fired again, this time at Grant's position. The shell missed by 15 feet, but the shockwave threw dirt and debris over his crew. He could hear the German commander shouting, could see the cupola hatch open as he scanned for targets. Hold fire, Grant told himself. Hold. At 0830 hours, the tiger began to move again. It was now just 300 yards away. The second tiger had advanced to its rear, covering the flanks. Behind them, the Panzer Grenadiers were fanning out into the fields. Lieutenant Colonel Lang watched from his command post, a farmhouse a quarter-mile behind the crossroads. Through his binoculars, he could see the tigers growing larger, could see the German infantry spreading out like a net. He knew his 6-pounders couldn't stop them. He knew his men were outnumbered and outgunned. He picked up the radio and called for artillery support. The 25-pounders were ready, but they had only 60 rounds left. At 0840 hours, the lead tiger reached the edge of the minefield. The British engineers had laid their mines in a staggered pattern across 90 yards of road. Each mine held 16 pounds of high explosive. Enough to blow a track off any tank. But they needed a direct hit. The tiger's driver, unaware of the danger, kept to the center of the road. It was standard doctrine. Stay on the hard surface. Avoid the soft shoulders. At 0845 hours, the tiger's right track rolled over a patch of disturbed earth. For a split second, nothing happened. Then the world exploded. The blast lifted the tiger's front end off the ground. 60 tons of German steel, designed to withstand the heaviest punishment, was thrown upward like a toy. The mine had detonated directly beneath the right front road wheel, shredding the track, shattering the wheel assembly, and punching a hole through the belly armor. Inside the tank, chaos. The driver, a young man named Karl Voss, was killed instantly, his chest crushed against the steering levers. The radio operator beside him suffered a fractured skull and severe burns as hydraulic fluid ignited in the compartment. Black smoke poured from the hatches. The tiger lurched to a stop, its right side sagging, its tracks hanging loose. The commander shouted orders, but the tank wasn't going anywhere. Without its tracks, it was nothing more than a steel coffin. The second tiger reversed immediately, its crew recognizing the danger. The Panzer Grenadiers scattered into the ditches. Grant's 6-pounder crew opened fire. Their first round struck the disabled Tiger's side armor at 200 yards. The shell penetrated, tearing through the engine compartment. A second round struck the turret, jamming it. The Tiger's gun, once the terror of the battlefield, now pointed uselessly at the sky. But the second Tiger was still coming. It moved off the road into the soft fields, its 88mm gun swinging toward Grant's position. Grant saw the muzzle flash and threw himself to the bottom of his gun pit. The shell struck the earthen parapet, showering his crew with dirt. One of his loaders was hit, shrapnel tearing through his shoulder. The gun was still intact, but the crew was shaken. At 0900 hours, the second Tiger fired again. This time, the shell struck the 6-pounder's shield, ripping the gun from its mount and sending it cartwheeling across the road. Grant and his remaining crew scrambled for cover as machine gun bullets chewed up the ground around them. Their gun was gone. The roadblock was defenseless. Lang watched through his binoculars as the second Tiger lumbered across the field, its engine roaring, its gun searching for new targets. Behind it, the Panzer Grenadiers were advancing, their machine guns and mortars pinning down the British infantry. The crossroads was less than 200 yards away. He made a desperate call. He asked his artillery battery to fire directly in front of the advancing Tiger, not to destroy it, but to blind it, to slow it down, to buy his men a few more minutes. The 25-pounders opened fire at 0910 hours, their shells bursting in the soft ground around the Tiger, throwing up curtains of mud and smoke. The German commander, momentarily blinded, halted his tank. He waited for his infantry to catch up, for the smoke to clear. It was the delay the Argylls needed. In the chaos of the battle, a single man made a decision. Corporal Thomas MacKinnon was a 32-year-old section leader from the Argyll support platoon. He had been watching the second Tiger from behind a low stone wall, his PIAT anti-tank weapon resting beside him. He knew the 6-pounder was gone. He knew the PIAT was useless against the Tiger's frontal armor. But he also knew that if that tank reached the crossroads, his friends, the men he had fought beside for 3 years, would be slaughtered. He had one advantage. The Tiger, blinded by the artillery smoke, had turned slightly, exposing its left flank. The side armor was thinner. And the PIAT, for all its shortcomings, could penetrate it at close range. If he could get close enough. If he could hit the right spot. If he could survive long enough to fire. He signaled to his 2 men, Private William Fraser and Private John Campbell. Together, they began to crawl through the mud toward the stalled Tiger. The artillery smoke covered their movement. The Panzer Grenadiers, pinned down by British small arms fire, did not see them. MacKinnon carried the PIAT, an ungainly weapon that looked more like a scaffolding than a gun. It fired a spring-loaded bomb with an effective range of just 115 yards. To fire it, he would have to stand, balance the weapon on his shoulder, and hope the Tiger's crew didn't see him first. At 0930 hours, the smoke began to clear. The Tiger's engine roared to life, and the tank started to move again. MacKinnon was now just 40 yards from its left flank. He could see the German crew inside the turret, could see the commander leaning out to scan the field. He rose to his knees. His hands were steady. He aimed at the Tiger's side, just below the turret, where the armor was thinnest. He pulled the trigger. The bomb struck the Tiger with a deafening clang. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a jet of molten metal punched through the armor, igniting ammunition stored inside the turret. A secondary explosion ripped the Tiger apart from within. The turret lifted 6 inches off its ring before settling back at a grotesque angle. Flames erupted from every hatch. MacKinnon didn't wait. He and his men were already crawling back toward the wall as machine gun fire from the Panzer Grenadiers tore up the ground where they had been kneeling seconds before. Inside the Tiger, the crew had seconds to escape. The commander, his face burned, threw himself from the turret. The gunner followed, his legs on fire. The driver and loader never made it out. The Tiger burned for the next 3 hours, its ammunition cooking off in sporadic explosions that echoed across the battlefield. With both Tigers destroyed, the German attack lost its momentum. The Panzer Grenadiers dug in along the road, waiting for reinforcements that never came. By noon, a British counterattack had pushed them back beyond the river. When the smoke cleared, the Argylls counted their dead. 7 men were gone. 19 were wounded, including Lieutenant Grant, who would lose the use of his left arm. The farmhouse where the first 88mm shell had struck was reduced to rubble. But the crossroads was still in British hands. The German losses were heavier. 12 Panzer Grenadiers lay dead, and another 30 were wounded. 2 Tiger tanks, machines that represented months of industrial effort and years of crew training, lay wrecked on Belgian soil. The 506th Heavy Tank Battalion would spend weeks reorganizing, its combat effectiveness severely degraded just as the Allies prepared to launch the invasion of Normandy. Corporal Thomas MacKinnon was awarded the Distinguished Conduct Medal, the second highest honor for gallantry in the British Army. His citation read, "With complete disregard for his own safety, Corporal MacKinnon engaged an enemy heavy tank at close range under heavy machine gun fire. By his courage and determination, he single-handedly destroyed the enemy vehicle and broke the back of the German counterattack, saving his battalion from encirclement." He never spoke much about what happened that day. When asked, he would shrug and say, "I just did what anyone would have done." But those who knew him knew better. He went home to Scotland after the war, married his sweetheart, and worked in the coal mines until he retired. He died in 1998, one of the last of his generation to carry the memory of that morning in Belgium. The wreck of the first Tiger, the one stopped by a single mine, remained on the Ophoven road for the rest of the war. Local villagers eventually stripped it for scrap. The second Tiger was recovered by British engineers and studied for intelligence value. But the steel is gone now, melted down and forgotten. What remains is the story. The story of a handful of exhausted men who refused to break. Of a single mine buried in the mud. Of a single man who rose to his knees with an ungainly weapon and fired into the side of a monster. In the end, the battle at Ophoven was a small thing. It doesn't appear in most history books. There are no monuments to the men who fought there, no Hollywood movies about their stand. But for the men who were there, it was everything. It was the difference between holding the line and watching it collapse. Between going home and staying in the mud forever. They faced the best the German army could throw at them, and they did not break. They proved, in the cold rain of a Belgian spring, that no machine is invincible. That courage, even when it comes from a tired man with a clumsy weapon, can still move mountains. In the vast tapestry of the Second World War, the skirmish at Ophoven is little more than a footnote. But for the men who fought there, it was everything, the difference between survival and annihilation, between holding the line and watching it collapse. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to World War II Records as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life.